Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Please ignore the giant pink canvas behind me. I painted over an old painting earlier this week with the intention of then starting on a new painting, and I haven't gotten to that yet. So that's what that is about, and I did not intentionally match it. This is just the hooded sweatshirt that I'm wearing today. And also I'm lazy and we have no lights on, so we're filming with natural light, so hopefully it will cooperate and we're not going to get any crazy bright spots. And that is the end of all the disclaimers. Super glad you're here today. Thank you so much to everybody who's been leaving the really sweet comments on the recent videos. I've been trying to reply more. I do my best to stay on top. Well, no, I can't stay on top of it, I'll be honest. But I do my best to reply as much as I can. So just know that I read every single one of your comments and I appreciate all of them, and I appreciate you for being here. So today we are going to talk about inspiration, and we're going to talk about inspiration in the context of a specific situation that a number of you have mentioned, and something that I really relate to, and that is a situation where you feel inspired, but then you go to make something and you actually really can't make anything. And it kind of happens over and over again. You'll have this cycle of like feeling super inspired and then going to create and not being able to create anything. So if that sounds familiar to you, if you are acquainted with that horrible cycle, then stick around. This video is for you. All right, so the first thing I want to mention is that we have a little bit of a challenge, I think, in the way that we use the word inspiration. Most of us use it to mean a couple of different things, very broadly, both kind of interest and having your interest piqued by something and being curious about it and excited by it, and then also motivation, you know, having that drive to get up off your couch and actually make something and do something. So we tend to use it to mean both of those terms kind of interchangeably. And I think, at least for me, speaking from my own experience, the trouble with that is that we can end up getting kind of caught up too much in the interest phase of inspiration, the interest and curiosity phase, and then seeing all of these like shiny, interesting, beautiful things. You know, you're looking on social media, or you know, I guess really that's all you would be doing anymore. You're not going to museums right now. If you're watching this in the future, this is the tail end of the COVID pandemic. But yeah, you get inundated with beautiful images or ideas or concepts from around you, and you get really excited to make work, and you get kind of caught in that phase and a little bit disconnected from the motivation phase. And then that in turn leads to you being stuck in this cycle of, you know, seeing something shiny, being really excited by it, wanting to make something, and then actually when the rubber meets the road, there isn't any road, or there isn't any rubber, you're not actually able to put pen to paper and create something. So we are going to talk about how to break that cycle, how to take your inspiration from the interest phase into the deeper motivation phase and actually make work. The short explanation is that you want to make your inspiration smaller. You want to shrink it down and make it more accessible. So that big, expansive feeling, at least for me, this is how inspiration feels. If I see something or hear an idea, it could be a lot of different methods for me. It's not just visual. Sometimes it's a concept or a thought, or music is how it happens for me a lot. And I just have this feeling of like opening up and like longing and hope, and it's just this like big, beautiful, expansive feeling, and it's transcendent and enormous, and it feels kind of impossible to put into words. That's how inspiration feels for me. So the challenge then is taking that really big feeling and making it into something smaller that you can actually act on. So you have to try to capture that feeling, capture that enormity, that transcendence, and break it down and make it more specific and achievable. So one way that this worked for me a number of years ago, I mean, if you watch this channel regularly, it's no secret to you that I really love drawing food. That's a huge amount of what I do, both in my self-initiated work and in my work with clients. But before I had started drawing food, what I was actually really interested in was eating together and feasts and like family meals, and how food and eating was this universal thing across cultures that people could connect over. And you know, it was something that was, yeah, so universal, but also so diverse. There were so many different forms of it, different flavors, different visual expressions of it, all across the board. So yeah, I had this like really kind of transcendent idea of these enormous paintings of like top-down views of feasts or big meals with lots of people together. I actually probably wasn't even that specific. It was more just like this feeling of being inspired by the concept of, people coming, sorry about the noise, of people coming together across a shared meal. So that obviously was a really big idea. And I think I probably did do some initial little concept-y sketches in that phase. But again, if you watch this channel regularly, you probably know that was around the time that I was recovering from kind of starting to get my my illness under control. So what I needed to do in that moment was make it a lot smaller. This is actually how I've learned how inspiration works for me. It would have taken me much longer if I hadn't gotten sick to realize, no, what you have to do is like take that big, enormous feeling that you don't want to ruin and feel so precious and beautiful. And you have to be willing to just like hack it apart and find your way in, even if it's just like this little tiny crack that you can get in through. So what I did with that big concept was turned it into little drawings of individual food items instead. And it was not at all a perfect execution of the feeling that I had in my mind or that sense of inspiration. It didn't do hardly any of what it only scratched the surface of what I wanted to express or the feeling of inspiration that I had at the time. But it eventually grew and expanded, and it became I had no sense when I was initially doing those food paintings. I was only doing it for me. I was doing it to motivate myself because I was so depressed from being home and sick all alone. I had no concept that they would be used commercially. I had no plan for that. It was just this little thing I was doing to motivate myself. So eventually it did take on another life and it took on other meanings. But at the time, it felt very kind of disappointing in some ways to take that really big concept and break it down to just this little tiny sliver of the whole. But that was what I had to do to actually get moving on it, to get from the interest phase of my inspiration to the motivation phase of my inspiration. So let's say it another way or break it into steps. This is one of my favorite things to do. So step one, I think is pretty easy. It's pretty exciting. If you're a creative person, it's probably something you do intuitively on your own all the time. If you're anything like me, it's something that happens some days, dozens of times a day, and that is to feel inspired. So that's step one, feel inspired. And step two is the harder part, is the trickier part, and that is to break down that inspiration, take that big expansive feeling and break it down into its components. So if you haven't done this before, it can be kind of tricky to do. It's something that I still, if I'm honest, is still kind of a struggle for me because I can get so attached to that big expansive idea. But a few questions that you could ask yourself, like, so once you have your thing that you're inspired by or your moment of inspiration, try asking yourself some of these questions. So what made you feel that way initially? What was the subject matter? What was the approach? What was the media used? That is if we're talking about a specific piece of artwork or, maybe a single person's body of artwork. Are there keywords that you can identify, thematic elements, feelings that you can name? What you want to do is look for those really, really tiny slivers, the smallest handholds that you can grab onto, the little cracks that will allow you to get in. Try to be as specific and concrete and small as possible. Step number 3 is to then translate those specifics into a project that you can tackle now. So, when I was translating from my big idea of the thing that inspired me, the feasts and the eating together, translating that into individual portraits of food, drawings of food. I didn't have this process. I wasn't like executing a process. All I was doing was desperately trying to keep my head above water. So that made it easy for me to just say, okay, well, this is the littlest thing that I can grab onto. I'll just grab onto this and that's going to keep me afloat. So if this feels tough or unnatural, that is totally normal. So yes, take your list, take your dissection of your inspiration, your thought process behind that. Am I out of time? No, I still have a few more minutes. and translate that into a project. So try not to make it too big. So make it something that is, and that could be big in terms of scope. It could be big in terms of the size of the work. It could be, I'm using that term in a pretty broad way, but try not to make it too big. Try not to make it something that you have to wait to start on. So I think, again, if you're anything like me, there's this tendency to be like, well, I could do this thing perfectly if I had this, or if I had that piece of equipment, or if I had this space, or if my life looked different, or whatever. You have to fit it to where you are right now. So make it small enough, make it something that you're not going to have to wait to start on. And this is kind of related, but the third point I would say here is don't wait until it feels perfect. Don't wait until you feel like, okay, I had my inspiration and now here's the perfect translation into a project. If you wait for that, that feeling will never come. I mean, maybe it will. Maybe you're a really different kind of creative person, but for the other artists and illustrators that I talk to, that I know, there is always this sense of what you're actually executing being a less than the inspiration. So feeling like, yes, the inspiration is this big, magnificent thing, and then when you come down to actually making it, it doesn't quite live up to it. That is a pretty if not universal, very common experience. So the goal is to get from inspiration to action as quickly as possible, so you don't get caught up in that cycle of, inspiration and interest and never translating it to motivation. So you want to feel inspired, capture that feeling and examine it, and then act on what you found as quickly as possible. So when you first do this, I can't remember who said this analogy. It's a famous person. So if you know, please put it in the comments. But trying to fully articulate your inspiration, trying to make your inspiration accessible and actually turn it into something in the real world can sometimes feel kind of like capturing and killing a butterfly. So in order to understand and appreciate and be able to act on this thing, you have to make it something less than it was. This sort of magical beauty almost has to be turned into something that's very ordinary in order for you to be able to act on it. And as frustrating as that is, it's just a necessary part of the creative process. That pure, uncut, untouched inspiration that you feel when you first have that wave of inspiration about something is always going to feel bigger and more. Is always going to feel bigger and richer and more powerful than your execution of it. And my personal belief is that you will really never be able to fully capture that feeling of inspiration. Anything you make is probably always going to feel like it's a little bit less than, because there's something kind of transcendent and mystical about it. So I think that there's really our best hope of being able to express it or understand it or turn it into art is to try incrementally. So to aim for these, making these little scratches in the surface, getting these little bits of the full picture, and over a lifetime, hopefully being able to capture some of that truth and inspiration. Now, that is really hard to do. And the reality is that many of us will get hung up in that place between feeling inspiration and then being really unwilling to act on it or unwilling to make art about it, because the realization of that inspiration feels so disappointing to you. And if you're one of those people, I want to speak directly to you right now, because I was one of those people too, and I still can be one of those people at times. And the reminder that I always need is that if you're doing that, if you are feeling inspired and then, making the decision to not turn it into something, to not make work because what you make doesn't feel good enough or doesn't feel true or doesn't feel big, whatever it is, that's a tragedy because we need, as I've already said, I think our only hope of really kind of truly expressing that inspiration and being able to translate inspiration into art is to make those tiny scratches in the surface. And if you have an insight, if your perspective, your person, the person who you are, the spot that you're coming from is different than everybody else's. So you have an opportunity to make that little scratch, to make that little mark, to take that little slice out, and you can show a viewpoint on it that's different than anybody else. So if you're not sharing that, even though it feels small and not enough, that is robbing. This is like a very, well, boy, I hope I'm not going to step on anybody's toes. I don't usually get this impassioned about it, but yeah, that's robbing the rest of us from being able to see that and experience it. So nobody is ever going to be able to fully express that pure transcendent inspiration. I'm sure somebody will disagree with me about that, but I don't think anybody can fully do it. But I think that together we can each build little windows into it. So if you are in that spot, if you keep getting stuck in between the interest and the motivation, I hope that this video will help you to take that step to actually feel motivated to make work, to make artwork. So thank you very much for watching this video. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you sticking around until the end. Thank you especially to my patrons for supporting this channel. Yeah, and I think that is it. I will see you guys next week. All right, bye.